Welcome to Explorations in Economic History. And today we're finally ready to experience the revolution and the context of Lenin and the Bolshevik Party coming to power and actually putting all of what they had been debating into practice. And for this, we will see a short video presenting the revolution in context.
The Tsar army fights on. These Cossacks have marched thousands of miles across snow-clad plains. They boast the greatest endurance of any soldiers. They will die by the thousands in the frozen trenches of Russia. In the villages behind the lines, people are starving. There is talk of revolution. Wounded soldiers returning from the front listen and think, why should they fight? At the front, troops begin to mutiny. The army stops fighting. They will go home and divide up the land, kill those who stand in their way. In Moscow, Kerensky heads a new government. It endures 6 months. And then come the 10 days that shake the world. The masses take charge of their destiny. With rifle, bayonet, machine gun, the Bolsheviks seize power. Parades are held. These banners say, join the Bolshevists. The new era is here. Bodies of nameless heroes are given little parades. And the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty ends. An empire is trampled down. Trotsky harangues the troops. Later he is banished, and the Red Army is born. It is drawn up in Moscow's Red Square. Its commander, Trotsky, takes the salute. That winter, great famine spreads throughout Russia. The American Red Cross feeds millions, and still millions die. In Moscow, the Kremlin is covered with snow, and behind its walls is Lenin, who heads the new order. His wife foresaw this great revolution. She will be called Lenin, the seer, the incorruptible prophet, the father of Bolshevism.
The popular mass uprising that became the February Revolution put the Provisional Government into power, and it was initially quite popular and supported by the people. However, it was quite weak. It was unwilling to stand up for much, and it called itself provisional, and this probably didn't help. And mainly it became unpopular because it refused to pull Russia out of World War I, which was getting worse and worse, more and more disasters and losses and loss of life, a devastating loss of life and shortage continued to make it less and less popular and made the provisional government less and less popular. And so this allowed the Bolsheviks to become much more popular themselves because they had consistently been in favor of pulling out of World War I, of peace. And their slogan, peace, land, and bread, became very popular. But this was a bit of a misleading slogan because although they were ready to give the peasants land initially, they would, of course, have a long-term policy of nationalization, socialization of land as part of their broader program. So their slogan, "All power to the Soviets," was also an interesting one. It was it lent credibility to their program when they did come into power because they did give sort of all power to the Soviets. However, the Soviets were part of their one-party state in their own mind, in their plan, and this is where they eventually went because they did not allow other parties to stay in office after they came to power, and slowly began to remodel the whole government and the whole system around their idea of what the Soviets were supposed to be as the workers' state, the workers' government. So war communism really refers to the Civil War, which started after the Bolsheviks came to power, and the peasants especially didn't appreciate the regime once after having initially been given back their land. It was then sort of expropriated. All of their surplus was expropriated, and their land was becoming nationalized again, and they could see that they wouldn't be able to keep hold of their land. So it was the Civil War that it usually refers to, but there's also a sense in which it refers to World War I, and that's because Lenin did partially base his idea of central planning and what would become the policies of war communism in part on wartime regimes where the militarization of the economy led to greater central planning or state capitalism, as Lenin called it. So in that sense, war communism could be said to also be based on World War I. And of course, war communism refers to the period 1918 to 1921 approximately, and in particular, the planning aspects and the attempts to bring communism during that period. And again, a quick reminder that this war communism attempt, these policies, were put into place when the economy had already been quite ravaged by World War I, and there had been further disruption and chaos during the February Revolution and in general in trying to have changeovers of government. And there were shortages of even staple food items before the Bolsheviks came to power as well as after. So although we will be arguing that the policies made things worse, it did start from a pretty bad place to begin with. And there were, in fact, a significant number of nationalizations over the course of war communism, including 45% of firms hiring labor and 66% when you include all of those that were just heavily subsidized. And full control over the firms was the intention, but was precluded by practical matters. So it wasn't only practical matters pushing leadership into nationalizing, sometimes it was practical matters preventing them from going the full course. A significant portion of even small firms were nationalized, almost half of those employing between 3 and 10 workers, for example. Now, of course, nationalizing firms isn't enough. As mentioned before, there is the linking up of the different firms beneath something like Vysenka, and also Lenin had a clear idea of the importance of banks in this. And so right away they nationalized banks, but their longer-term strategy involved abolishing the bank or transforming it into essentially a central bookkeeping department of the communist society, or in other words, sort of the central transmission point for where the plan would turn into the resources for the plan, and essentially the banks would make sure that only things in the plan were allowed to be produced by the factories. Only factories that were within the plan would be able to be involved in production. And ultimately, once the banks played this role of central bookkeeper, then they could slowly begin to, just allow money to dissolve away as they did things in kind, as they used non-cash transactions for everything, and the central bookkeeping was the role of a moneyless banking system. And they took practical steps in this direction. So, with the goal of abolishing money, the state introduced rationing and free goods and services. And Gregory Zinoviev, for example, spoke to, he is a member of the Central Committee, and he declared, I think, to the Central Committee, "We are approaching the complete abolition of money. We are making the wages of labor a payment in kind. We're introducing free trams. We already possess free education, free dinners, even if of a poor quality," he said, free housing, and free lighting. And also a decree in 1920 established that wages were to be paid in kind. And the same year, Lenin wrote to the Commission for Abolishing Cash Taxes that there, quote, "there is no doubt about switching from money to the exchange of products without money," and then went on to say that it couldn't occur just yet. First, it was necessary to end direct appropriation of peasant surpluses and move it to a tax in kind, because, of course, the peasants were revolting. And a declaration on February 1921 stated the intention to abolish all money payment of taxes. So they were still hoping to move in that direction in February 1921. Oh, and importantly, because they were so insistent on moving in this direction, on eventually abolishing currency, they did not mind when their policies began to affect the currency, devalue the currency, create money shortages, and so on and so forth. So there was, in fact, a first 5-year plan at this time. It was created by the State Committee for Electrification, so it's often thought of as just a plan for electrification, but I think Lenin used that term interchangeably with industrialization. It was really a plan to reorder the whole economy under Vysenka, the central planning body, and to, as Lenin said, transform the economy. It covered much more than merely what would be needed to spread electricity across the countryside. And Lenin also said that it would bring culture to the peasants and would eliminate the difference between town and peasant and transform the economy and the people. However, of course, it wasn't actually put into place, into practice. Centralization was carried out at about 5 to 10% of what was intended. However, it was Lenin's intention to carry out the plan, and as I say, it was practical hurdles that got in the way. Lenin spoke very highly of it. He said that it was a real scientific plan. He said it ranges over about 10 years and gives an indication of the numbers of workers and capacities. It's only a rough approximation, he said, but it's a real scientific plan. He said, "We have precise calculations by experts for every major item and every industry. To give a small example, we have the calculations for the output of leather footwear at 2 pairs a head, 300 million pairs, etc. As a result, we have a material and financial balance sheet for electrification." So, what would have happened if the plan had been able to go into practice, and what stopped it exactly? We'll look at some lessons that the Soviet planners learned and sort of see what went wrong in war communism, and then look at it again when Stalin attempted the same thing in 1928-29.